Thank you very much, Carmen. Thank you all, and welcome everybody. Let me spend a few words and call to the floor Professor Arlie Hochschild and Professor Zygmunt Baumann. Okay. As we all know, sociology has a very long tradition already in the study of differences and how they are being made salient and shape inequalities. And they contribute to shape inequality. As Carmen was mentioning, we already know something, there is already some knowledge accumulated about class inequalities, gender inequalities, and more recently, religion, age, and ethnic related inequalities. But although we have achieved already some knowledge about the mechanisms related to the production and transmission of those inequalities, as well, increasingly so, we know something about the life course dynamics outcomes of those inequalities, and how nation states can mediate those outcomes. We know, as sociologists, we've been far less successful in translating our findings into institutional practice and informing the general debate, the public debate, and influencing the arena where narratives, shared meanings, and rule are being constructed and social institutions are being transformed, as is suggested by Amartya Sen in his An Idea of Justice. Meanwhile, as many authors are claiming, we are witnessing an increasing tension between what the EU strategy set as goals, which are to reduce poverty and social exclusion, and the measure put in place to actually achieve those goals. And we are now basically even worse than the onset of this agenda setting. There is an increasing difficulty in attaining those goals because of reducing inequalities, because especially of the austerity measure put in place, in some countries more than others, that are cutting welfare spending. And in this, especially in assistance, healthcare, and education, they have an impact on the life course of people, which have an intergenerational dimension in this, because of the privatizing of public services and assets while privileging fiscal consolidation. And this has real tangible consequences in the experience of people, in their employment opportunities, in the life core outcomes of hundreds of thousands of European citizens and beyond, for whom the future prospects become more and more uncertain, precarious, and difficult to predict, and whose environment are being increasingly polluted. All this makes hard to imagine how empathy, solidarity, and responsibility can flourish where the state intervention is solidarity. It is, in fact, retrenching at the national and supranational level, leaving individuals more unprotected from risks, from aging, unemployment, and health-related risks because of cuts in welfare provision, public goods and services, and the progressive deregulation of employment relations. This tension is made clear, among other things, by the Greek crisis that we have all witnessed just now, but also at a different level by Al Jazeera announcement a few days ago of withholding from using the word immigrants to refer to those people who are crossing the Mediterranean, and in reporting about those travels to use instead the words of people, families, and refugees. And we have now devised for this conference 2 plenary sessions to discuss the concept of differences, inequality, and sociological imagination, and in our word, and if and how this can contribute to enhance our understanding of the contemporary world, but also could improve our effectiveness in influencing the public discourse. The impact of the recent economic crisis and its effect on inequality and social cohesion in Europe will be discussed by Professor Christopher Whelan in the closing session of this conference, while Professor Gudminder Bambra will try to overcome the Eurocentric perspective and contribute with a post-colonial view on the debate of Europe building and the definition of the boundaries of responsibility and solidarity that Europe should apply. Today, Arlie Hochschild, Professor Emerita in Sociology at the University of California, but also well known in Europe, she was author of many books translated in 16 languages, and which testify her incredible capacity to reveal agents, understanding, and strategies and rationales in their perceived context and opportunity. She's really well known for establishing the influential concept of emotional labor and help initiate the field of sociology of emotions. She enriched the sociological thoughts with a perspective inclusive also of women's experiences, which are reflected in some of her books, like The Managed Heart, The Second Shift, The Ties Bind, The Global Women, and The Outsourced Self, that brilliantly illustrate the conflicts people struggle to resolve and the resulting strategies of accommodation where they cannot really solve them. But it is in their latest work that she lays out the powerful link between the government level, the policy, the social class, and family binds. This talk she will be giving today is part of her most recent research work in Louisiana, which is a poor and deeply polluted state in the US, and she will she will brief us and lecture us on the Tea Party, the anti-government populist movement or right-wing movement who favors capital freedom and opposes government aid or regulation. And this talk is part of a forthcoming book, which is going to be entitled "Stranger in Their Own Land: A Journey into the Heart of the Right." I'm honored to leave the floor to Professor Hochschild and her talk on deep stories, emotional agendas, and politics.
Thank you very much. We're all wonderfully gathered here, sociologists who are all using our imagination to illuminate facets of difference and inequality. And today I'd like to share with you some recent research I've been doing on a group that feels very locally rooted, but seems to have open arms to raw global capitalism, and for the implications of that for growing inequality and reduced tolerance for difference. So I want today to acquaint you with these people, to tell you why I think it's important that we understand how they feel, and to sharpen and develop our concepts for understanding them so that we can carry forward a more positive view of global development. So I'd like you to imagine that you are joining me in a geographic journey, some 8,000 more kilometers to the west and the south, to a southern part of the United States. It is in a state of Louisiana. It's shaped like a boot. You have Texas on one side, Mississippi on the other. It is part of a region of the United States that in the 1860s tried to secede from the rest of the country, which turns out to be important. And it's once was rice fields, cotton, and sugar fields. Now it is the center of petrochemical and oil development. It's very polluted. But the people I'm going to introduce you to don't want to regulate the polluters. So you've come with me from Prague to Lake Charles, Louisiana. And we are now going to interview a woman whom I will call Mary Beth Boudreau. She is an accountant in an oil company. Her father was a pipe fitter in a petrochemical company. She was fourth of 6 in her family, but her father, who never got beyond the 8th grade, came from a family of 10, and she has 43 cousins on that side. And her mother it came from an equally large family. And she tells me this proudly because she's single and doesn't have children, but she has gone to college and she's on her way up. Now, before we go any further in our interview with her, I have to warn you that we are in the United States, and this requires for some preparation for surprise. Over the last few weeks, you may have seen some of the Republican candidates for the American presidency, including Donald Trump, who announced that most American immigrants are murderers and rapists, that women's viewpoints are regulated by their menstrual cycle, and we have 3 candidates who do not believe in evolution. And out of 11, none will come out and say that they believe that there is human causation of global warming. So I had a European friend who wrote me a letter, an email, and she said, "What are you people doing over there in the United States? Running a freak show?" So I'm preparing you for another surprise. This woman, Mary Beth, let us call her, seems to you very intelligent about many topics, including accounting and geography and history. She reasons very lucidly. She knows that you come from a different culture, and she accepts that. She jokes about it. She has a sense of humor. In other words, she doesn't seem to you crazy, stupid, completely uneducated, mean, or cold. And you interview her in a very open way. You want to see what she wants to tell you. That's the first lesson you're tuning your ear to. And she tells you how she struggled to get where she is, how hard she worked, her diligence. And she tells you also that she proudly didn't accept any money from the federal government, just a little bit of a loan during her college years, which she quickly repaid. And that too seems to be for her a badge of honor. Then you turn to her attitudes toward a variety of things, including the American President Barack Obama. For 3 years before you interview her, she did not believe that the American president was an American. she believed he must have been born somewhere else. And when the long form came out, it was officially shared that showed, yes, indeed, he was born in Hawaii. Then she accepted that he was American, but he didn't grow up like an American. He says he's Christian, but he's probably Muslim. So she tells you about the federal government, that we ought to get rid of some 85% of it. We should cut welfare to the bone. Unemployment insurance, just a tiny bit. Paid parental leave for new parents, forget about it. And she doesn't think we should regulate industry very lightly. Maybe we used to have a problem, she'll say, but it's gone away. She opposes gay marriage, right to abortion, out of wedlock births, and very much believes in owning guns. So you have traveled over 8,000 kilometers to meet a pleasant, normal-seeming, intelligent, college-educated woman, but after your first interview, you feel like Alice in Wonderland. Then, over the next 5 years, you interview 60 people, 40 who are very hardcore right-wing members of the Tea Party, and 20 others to get their views of this. And they're not very different from Mary Beth. And at this point, you ask yourself, why is this important that I understand this woman? And there are several answers. First, in the United States, as in Europe, there has been a growth of the right wing. Estimates vary from 18 to 30% of Americans agree with the tenets of the Tea Party, that is the right of the Republican Party. And not only has the right grown, but there is an increasing split between left and right. Increasingly, we don't watch the same television programs or read the same newspapers. You have Fox News over here, you have MSNBC or CNN over there, and increasingly we don't even live near each other. A recent study indicated that when people move, less and less is it to a cheaper house or better weather or even a job, and more are people moving to live in an enclave, a political bubble where others believe as they do. And not only that, but the nature of political belief is stronger. It's more like a religion. One study asked both Democrats and Republicans, our two major parties, would it disturb you if your child were to marry someone of the other party? And in 1960, neither Democrats or Republicans worried about that, 4%, 5%. But in 2012, over a third of Democrats would be disturbed if their child married a Republican, and over half of Republicans would be disturbed if their child married someone that wasn't Republican. So we have a growth of the right, an increasing separation, people are just insulting each other and slogans, and a deepening of political belief. There's a final reason we need to be curious about that, and that is a great paradox. In the United States, the right-wing states, like Louisiana, are the poor states, the states with lower levels of education, more family disruption, higher divorce, more teen pregnancy, worse health, and they live 5 years less than do people in the left-wing states. At the same time, They receive more money from the federal government. Louisiana's state budget, 44% of it comes from Washington, D.C. And yet, they are opposing the federal government. They want to whittle it down. It's called Big Brother. So what's going on? They have the most needs, they're the most polluted, but at the same time, they oppose help in meeting those needs. So what conceptual ideas help us here? You could look at rational choice theory, and you could say, well, Mary Beth doesn't want to pay taxes, and it's in her own self-interest not to, and that's why she's the way she is. But there are several problems here. One, that doesn't explain why she believes that Barack Obama might not be an American, and it doesn't explain why living in a state where you can't swim in the lake and you can't eat the fish, you drink only bottled water, she doesn't want regulation of the polluters. And it also is tautological. In other words, whatever she believes is in her self-interest, and her self-interest determines what she believes. It doesn't help us. We can take another theoretical approach, which is manipulation from an elite above the grassroots. And there is a lot to this approach, but the idea is that rich billionaire oil men, like, for example, the Koch brothers, fund right-wing institutions and fund campaigns for right-wing candidates, and that influences the Mary Beths of the world. Yes, but that presumes a dumb social actor, a passive social actor, someone who just listens to the speech and nods yes. And Mary Beth is not passive, certainly, and she's not dumb. So this leaves a question. Finally, we can look at ideology as an important concept. But ideology, as it's often used, suggests a coherent set of ideas that comes from some received teaching. And the picture is one of that in the post-war period, 40s, 50s, 60s, that there was a conflict between two coherent ideological camps. One was communism, and one was free world ideology, liberalism. But in some way, I think that understanding, that picture has broken down, and what we have is incoherence. And therefore, I think we need to really start with the idea of emotion. What emotion does is put an I in the picture. So we're looking at the self-relevance of reality. And when we do that, I think what unfolds is an emotional logic that gets us farther. We do get to this emotional logic through what I call a deep story. A deep story is an allegorical tale. It's a story about a series of events told in a language of symbols at one remove from a person. A little emotional detachment there. It removes judgment. It removes facts. It's a story that follows emotion and emotion management. You make it up, and later you go back to your respondent, to your Mary Beth, and you ask her if that describes how she feels. Now, in this deep story, many people are standing in a long line looking up a hill. It's like almost a pilgrimage to a religious site. And beyond the brow of the hill is the American dream. You can't see what's causing changes in that dream. You just see the star at the brow of the hill. And Mary Beth, as a white Christian, older woman in the South, is in the middle of this line. There are many, she's toward the front middle, many poor people and people of color are behind her. And the line is at a stall. It's not going anywhere. And she feels anxious about this. Will the American dream be available for everyone or just a few? Am I one of those few? What's it going to be? And at the same time, she's in what I would call an honor squeeze. On one hand, she feels a strong sense of deserving for the American dream that brings her honor. And on the other hand, she feels put down. First, that her cultural beliefs are not accepted by the rest of the country. She's seen, she actually said this to me, oh, people from where you come from think I'm racist, that I'm homophobic, that I'm sexist, and that I'm a little overweight, which she is. And she feels demographically marginalized. There are fewer white, Christian, older people, and there's a growth of secularism. She's very upset, for example, that you can't say Merry Christmas. Now you have to say Happy Holidays, or just plain happy. So she feels like there's a political correctness that has made her feel emotionally colonized and in a smaller group. So she's waiting her spot, waiting to get the dream, but she's feeling this in this honor squeeze. Then some people start to cut into the line ahead of her. And she says, well, who are they? They're not waiting and following the rules the way I am. Well, there are immigrants, in her view. There are blacks or professional women, often middle class, who benefited from affirmative action programs. They're cutting in. And then there are public sector workers who have better hours on their job and higher pensions. And one after another, they're cutting ahead. And she, at all these steps, there is an emotional agenda she's following. At this point, she's trying to put up a sympathy guard against those that seem to be cutting in line and against people that aren't like her. One woman I interviewed said, I don't like CNN. Television show. I asked her why not. Well, Christine Amanpour is a foreign correspondent. I don't like her voice. And I asked, well, what is it about the voice? Well, Christine Amanpour will be in Africa with her arm around a small African child, and she'll be talking to you as if there's a problem. And as if we should do something about the problem, and as if maybe the problem's our fault. So it's very interesting the way in which a sympathy that she naturally feels, she kind of pulled back from. That's a kind of a little micro moment of emotion management by which people maintain their deep stories. So she's reasoning, why are those people cutting in line? Who's helping them do that? And she looks to a supervisor. This would be whose job it is to maintain social order and equity. That would be Barack Obama. And they see him as helping the people who are unjustly cutting in line. And so he's their president. He's loyal to them, but he's not my president. And so she develops a trust guard and a distrust guard, and she looks for little signs. Does he have a flag pin that's too small? Maybe he's not proud of America. And did he take his ring off during Ramadan, his wedding ring, indicating that he's a Muslim? Small little signs of suspicion. So finally, she looks at those who are ahead of her in line, more affluent, liberals, and she sees them turning around and taunting her. Oh, you're poor white trash. Oh, you're a redneck. Redneck is an epithet for someone who does agricultural work and their neck is red. So it's an insult. And so she feels that both the people cutting in line, the president, all these liberals ahead of her are making her into a stranger in her own land, are making her into a minority of her own, and she seeks nationally fellows who feel the same. So they are imposing their feeling rules about what's legitimate to feel or not on her. Now, she, by turning to others like herself, by divorcing herself from allegiance to the president, she feels she's engaged in an honor recovery, and without the help of the government, indeed in spite of it. So to conclude, what new lessons can we take away from this deep story? First, we can learn what the world feels like if you are Mary Beth, and in a place in a certain social class, race logic. Beyond that, the deep story gives us a closer access to the idea of honor, and the idea that when good jobs in the petrochemical plants, for example, are coming in, then she can base her honor on her work and her earning. But when that dries up, she can turn to other bases of honor. And these are based on church, family, and actually not receiving government help. So the deep story also informs these other traditional concepts we have, rational choice theory. If people are acting in their self-interest, we have to ask, what is that self-interest? This work suggests that we have to talk about emotional wealth, especially honor, not just material wealth. Secondly, for theorists of ideology, it adds the idea that beliefs have as their substructure kind of a legitimating function on feeling, so that she feels not only right to be envious and resentful of those who seem cutting in line, but entitled to that, like that's the right thing to feel. And finally, in a theory of manipulation from above, right-wing billionaires indeed do have interests, but they're very different. The interest is in deregulating industry and cutting down government aid and decreasing taxes on corporations. That is the Koch brothers' interest. They have no inherent interest in addressing inequality or diversity. But in fact, they appeal to an interest that the Mary Beths feel in honor. So it works two ways. In the South, there is a tradition of geographic secession during the Civil War from the federal government. And in a way, the national right-wing movement taps into that tradition of secession. In the 1860s, it was a geographic secession. But I believe that the right wing in the United States wants a financial, an economic secession, so that it is no longer responsible for the problems of the poor and Black and immigrants. And so the two kinds of secession come together. That's why the South likes the right and the right likes the South. We usually assume that when right-wing leaders appeal to the Mary Beths, they appeal to their lesser angels, their greed, their racism, their selfishness, their intolerance. And to some degree, I think that's true. But at a deeper level, I believe they successfully appeal to individuals' good angels, to their diligence at work, their capacity to follow the rules, their local generosity, their church good works, and independence from government. They appeal, these right-wing leaders, to what feel to the Mary Beths like their best self. The deep story finally opens up new questions. What facts does a deep story hide? What does it lead people not to look at? And here I think we have a lot of work to do, that people don't just deny reality. They know it's there and avoid knowing. There's a special zone of seeing and not seeing, knowing and not knowing, and not going to a place that makes you feel the way you don't want to feel. So that's one question. The zone of not wanting to know. She knows about global capitalism but doesn't want to know. And for each deep story, there is a practical strategy. In other words, a strategy for addressing the problems of global capitalism. And I think the right-wing Mary Beth strategy is to circle the wagons around home and church and local community and say, oh, we don't need a really effective public sector, just home and church on the one hand, and then get on bended knee to capital. Petrochemical comes in and says, we don't want you to regulate us. And they say, yes, don't worry, we won't. And the company comes in and says, we don't want to pay corporate taxes. Fine, we won't. Just come, just give us jobs. And so this is kind of actually the practical consequences of that deep story. Now, I think the left and liberals, we have our deep story too. And we're assembled around a public square, and we want an important, vital kind of set of public institutions that we all can share. And we fear the erosion of that. But each deep story leads to a different strategy for handling the scary prospect of global capitalism. So luckily, there are other, I believe, better, more positive, practical strategies to offer so that we can imaginatively address issues of difference and inequality in this sorry but very improvable world. Thank you.